Добър ден на всички. В началото ще ви преразкажа малко каква ни беше срещата и да не ви смущава формата на 4 очи, тъй като това, което си говорихме на 4 очи, го преразказахме после и в следващия формат. Няма проблеми на вас да ви разкажем за какво сме си говорили. Но на мене ми се ще да започна с темата за изпращане на български войници в Украйна. Значи, за мен това е типичен пример за хибридна атака и дезинформация. Никога не е обсъждана такава тема в формат НАТО, не е обсъждана и днес такава тема. Нека да бъдат спокойни българските граждани. Няма тема за изпращане на български войници в Украйна. Това е поредна дезинформация, която ми се налага да опровергавам. Иначе говорихме за 20-годишното членство на България в НАТО, 17-годишното в Европейския съюз, но се концентрирахме, разбира се, върху членството ни в НАТО. Стигнахме до общите изводи, че България е един надежден съюзник в НАТО и изпълнява своите задължения. Ще се спра и на формата, на който сме свидетели, който приключва днес. Това е парламентарната асамблея на НАТО. На нея участват около 400 души. Близо 200 от тях са народни представители. Впечатляващо е, че са от 32-те страни, които са в НАТО представителите. Отделно имат такива 25, които са партньори на НАТО. Това е формата, на който присъства днес генералният секретар на НАТО Jens Stoltenberg. Аз му благодарих за присъствието, защото то е знаково. В тежък момент на обстановка по сигурност въобще, особено пък по източния фланг на НАТО, където сме ние. Обсъдихме въпросите, че трябва да се върне отново значимостта на Западните Балкани, каквато, ако си спомняте, 2017 година България беше лидер в този процес. Казах, че е хубаво, че отново се връща тази тема и то да се дигне пак на същата висота, на която беше и тогава. Обсъдихме въпросите в Черноморския регион по понятни причини и, разбира се, помощта за Украйна. Помощта за Украйна, двамата сме на мнение, че не може да има алтернатива по помощта за Украйна, но хубавото беше, което каза генералният секретар на НАТО Столтенберг накрая, е, че с всички сили и всички възможности трябва да помагаме на Украйна, но с мисълта да не бъде въвлечен НАТО в конфликта. Цитирам дословно думи, надявам се, че всички вие си ги записвате съвсем точно. И по този начин отговаряме на доста от въпросите, които биха възникнали според мен, но все пак да ви оставим. Ще дам думата на генералния секретар Столтенберг, след това ще имате по два въпроса да зададете на всеки един от нас, на които ние ще бъдем на разположение да отговорим.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister Gladchev, Dimitar. It's great to see you again. It's great to be back in Sofia. And it was great to attend the NATO Parliamentary Assembly this morning. Perhaps the biggest assembly of parliamentarians representing democratic nations in the world, 32 NATO allies and many partners. So thank you also for hosting the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Bulgaria is a valued and a reliable NATO ally. We appreciate very much what Bulgaria is doing and has done for 20 years to enhance our collective defense, to strengthen our shared security. For 20 years, you have played a critical role in maintaining the security of the Black Sea, the Western Balkans and beyond. You host one of NATO's 8 multinational battle groups helping to deter Russian aggression on the alliance eastern flank. Your troops play an important role in our KFOR peacekeeping mission in Kosovo, and you contribute to NATO's training mission in Iraq. Last year, Bulgaria increased defence spending by nearly 20%, and this year you will meet the guideline of spending 2% of GDP on defence. We appreciate that very much, and it confirms that Bulgaria is a reliable partner and member of the alliance that helps to strengthen our collective defence. Today we discussed the preparations for the summit of NATO in Washington in July. At the summit we will strengthen our deterrence and defence for a more dangerous world. We will strengthen our support to Ukraine, both now and for the future, and we will strengthen our partnerships around the world. As I said today at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, we can never take our freedom or security for granted. That is why, across the alliance, we are ramping up the production of weapons and ammunition. That is why NATO is bolstering its response to Russia's hostile action, which target our critical infrastructure and democratic processes. And that is why we are planning for NATO to play a greater role in coordinating security assistance and training for Ukraine. In recent weeks, allies have made major new pledges for support for Ukraine, and these pledges will make a difference. But it will not be enough unless we sustain them. All allies must dig deeper. Our world faces increasing threats, but NATO is stronger and more prepared. So, Prime Minister, dear Dimitar, thank you once again for welcoming me here in Sofia.
Имате думата за въпроси, заповядайте.
Ирина Цонева, Българска национална телевизия, господин генерален секретар, господин премиер. Господин Столтенберг, съществен акцент във вашето изказване в рамките на парламентарната асамблея беше, че е необходим целият алианс да засили помощта за Украйна. Поискахте ли това и от българската страна? И господин Главчев, готова ли е България да предприеме действия за увеличаване на помощта за Украйна? Знам, вие сте служебен министър-председател, но поискано ли беше това от нас? Благодаря.
Аз ли да ви отговоря първо? Накрая на разговора ни се уточни, че господин Столтенберг говори за алианса като цяло, че трябва да засили помощта си за Украйна. А ние от своя страна представихме информация в лицето на министър Запрянов и шефа на въоръжените сили адмирал Добрев. Представихме справка какво сме направили. Смятам, че генералният секретар на НАТО остана доволен от това, което сме направили към момента и даже подчерта, че е доволен от това, което България към момента прави и в рамките на Алианса сме добър пример. Така че от нас специално не е поискано разширяване на военната помощ. Ние и до сега сме казвали винаги, че правим всичко, което е в рамките на възможното, за да подпомагаме Украйна. За друго е необходимо решение на Народното събрание. Придържаме се изключително в рамките на това, което е прието като решение от Народното събрание. Камо ли пък ние като служебно правителство да правим нещо различно, нали? Бъдете сигурни, че няма как да се случи. Благодаря.
Well, Bulgaria, as all the NATO allies, have provided unprecedented support for Ukraine. And this has made a huge difference. We have to remember that when this war started back in February 2022, most experts feared that Russia was going to take control over Ukraine within weeks. That didn't happen. The Ukrainians have been able to liberate roughly 50% of the territory that Russia occupied at the beginning of the war. And they have been able to inflict heavy losses on the Russian invaders. Having said that, we need to do more because the reality is that what we have done so far is not enough. And we have also seen some gaps in supplies of support. So therefore, I urge all allies, also Bulgaria, to do more, and not least to sustain and make our support even more coordinated and more predictable. And that's also the reason why I have supported, or I have proposed, a bigger NATO role in coordinating security assistance and training for Ukraine. And I expect that when we meet in Washington, NATO allies will agree a stronger NATO coordinating role in providing support to Ukraine, because that will provide us with more accountability. It will provide more predictability in the support for Ukraine, and it will provide a platform to ensure a high level of burden sharing among NATO allies. So we welcome, appreciate everything Bulgaria has done, but we call on allies, and I expect allies to agree, a stronger institutionalized framework for our support and also a financial pledge. I have suggested a multi-year financial pledge to ensure that we can finance for the long haul our support to Ukraine. Let me just add one more thing, and that is that we have to remember that we do this in solidarity with Ukraine. But we support Ukraine not only because it will be a tragedy for Ukraine if President Putin prevails and wins and takes control of Ukraine. It will also be dangerous for us, because then the message to President Putin and to other authoritarian leaders is that when they violate international law, when they invade another country, they achieve what they want. And that will make the world even more dangerous. So it's in our security interest to support Ukraine and ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. And therefore I expect NATO leaders to agree a stronger NATO role for the support to Ukraine. And that's also why I suggested a strong financial pledge, multi-year financial pledge for Ukraine in the coming years.
Имате още по един въпрос.
Кристина Налбантова, BTV. Въпрос към господин Йенс Столтенберг. В връзка с идеята съюзниците да вдигнат рестрикциите към Украйна за използване на западно оръжие срещу руски военни цели, мислите ли, че това ще има отговор от страна на Русия? И във връзка с думите на министър-председателя Gladchev, че целта е да не се въвлече НАТО в война, как ще се случи това? И мислите ли, че има такъв риск, ако тези рестрикции се вдигнат?
First, I think it's important to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Russia has attacked, invaded another country, violating international law, killing civilians, and occupying parts of Ukrainian territory, violating international recognized borders, which also Russia originally recognized. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law. According to international law, Ukraine has the right to defend itself. Self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. Self-defense is enshrined in international law. So Ukraine has the right to defend themselves against Russian aggression. We have the right as NATO allies to help Ukraine uphold the right of self-defense. And that's exactly what NATO allies have done by providing military support to Ukraine. That does not make NATO or NATO allies party to the conflict. We provide Ukraine with support, but we don't send in NATO troops, NATO capabilities to take part in the conflict, neither on land or in airspace over Ukraine. Then it's for allies to decide on restrictions on the weapons they deliver to Ukraine. That's not a NATO decision. It's a decision made by individual allies. Individual allies have made different decisions. Some allies have no restrictions. Other allies have imposed different restrictions. My message is that I think the time has come to consider some of these restrictions, because we need to remember that Ukraine has the right for self-defense. They are defending their land, their territory, and according to international law, the right for self-defense includes the right to strike legitimate military targets outside Ukraine. That's part of self-defense. And we see this very clearly demonstrated now in the fighting in Kharkiv, because the Russian forces are on Russian territory, attacking just over the border Ukrainian territory. The front line is more or less the borderline. And if you cannot attack the Russian forces on the other side of the front line, because they are on the other side of the border, then of course you really reduce the ability of the Ukrainian forces to defend themselves. Because then the Russians can just shoot without being attacked back. And some allies have lifted restrictions, other allies have not. My message is that I think we should now consider those restrictions, because by having too many restrictions, we are tying one hand of the Ukrainian armed forces on their back, because they're reducing their capability to defend themselves. But again, these are national decisions, no NATO decision on restrictions, and there are different restrictions on different types of weapons. So I'm not saying there are going to be absolutely no restrictions in the future, but I'm saying that we need to consider those national restrictions, especially in light of the nature of the fighting now taking place in the Kharkiv region, where the Russians can be protected by the national border, which is more or less the same as the front line.
Имате ли други въпроси?
Добромир Видев, Българско национално радио. Господа, интересуваме какво сте си говорили по въпроса за разполагане на съюзнически зенитно-ракетни комплекси по нашето крайбрежие. Това е едно желание, което България има от дълго време.
Нищо не сме говорили по тази тема. Не сме обсъждали тази тема.
Should I answer that? Yeah. Well, as you know, we have increased NATO presence in the Black Sea region. We have air policing, we have battle groups, also now in Romania and Bulgaria. Of course, this increases, and we also increased our vigilance. We have more reconnaissance capabilities, and all of this helps us to monitor, follow closely what Russia does, and also to be able to respond if we see any increased threat levels. We don't see any imminent threat of an armed attack against any NATO ally, but of course with the war going on in Ukraine, with all the instability in the Black Sea, it has been necessary to increase our vigilance, to increase our presence, both on land but also in the air, to ensure that we are able to react if there is a need to further step up our presence. Part of what we are doing now as NATO is to invest more in integrated air and missile defense, to increase our ability to quickly reinforce, to deploy necessary capabilities. And of course we will be very vigilant and continue to monitor the situation in the Black Sea, including in Bulgaria, and I welcome that we have now a battle group in Bulgaria. Let me just once again stress that what we do when it comes to support to Ukraine doesn't make NATO allies party to the conflict. NATO fundamentally has two tasks when it comes to Ukraine. One is to support Ukraine, and we provide support, and the other is to prevent this conflict from escalating beyond Ukraine. We don't want a full-scale conflict between Russia and NATO. NATO doesn't seek conflict with Russia, and the fact that we are supporting Ukraine doesn't make NATO and NATO allies a party to the conflict. And therefore, we have no plans of deploying NATO troops into Ukraine or send NATO air capabilities into Ukrainian airspace, but we are providing critical support to Ukraine so they can defend themselves.
Други въпроси имате ли? Не. Благодаря ви. Приятен ден ви желая.